All right. Well, we are now going to move on to Galaxie 500 on fire. In the montage, you heard Strange, and now you're going to hear a clip from Snowstorm. So this was an interesting one, guys, because
Wait, let me get the numbers here, John.
Yeah,
Before
go for
you
the numbers. I'm
get
sorry.
going.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yep. So on fire by Galaxie 500. Actually, pretty apropos because Canada's on fire, and I can smell it in my backyard.
Yes.
So Galaxie 500 comes in at number 52 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 5 in 1989, number 388 of all time. It is Galaxie 500's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Did not make Rolling Stones list, and it comes in at number 3. And Galaxie 500 actually rated number 340 of all time.
Did you say 52 of the 80s?
I did say that, Josh. Yes, 52 of the 80s. Highly regarded. And the artist is 340 of all time. That's pretty high.
Who's smoking?
This album is
Tip in your hand there, Josh.
This album's the second one of 3 that Galaxie 500 did. They had a pretty incredible rise. They formed in 1987, although when I go into the bio, you'll see that they formed, but there were elements of this ahead of time, and they broke up very suddenly in 1991. A lot of the best info from this bio I have is a long form sort of, the history where each of the people are giving their take and people around them are giving their take. I forget what that's called.
Oral
but it's
history?
like an oral history. There you go. So there is one from 2010 with the 3 members of this band. I have to say, guys, this is as close to what if the 3 of us were in a band, personality-wise, would be. There is definitely a John, a Matt, and a Josh in this band. Like,
which one am I?
Without a doubt. And the interesting thing is that 2 members of the band were a couple who also ended up getting married. And so basically from the pre-dating the band all the way to today, they were a married couple. So this band is basically a couple and a guy is how to describe it. So
which one of us are married to each other?
I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to do the bio and then I'll let you guys do it. So the band, the non-member of the couple is Dean Wareham. He is the guitarist and vocalist for the band. You've then got Wareham, I've seen as well. You could kind of do it together. And he is originally from New Zealand. And drummer Damon Krakowski and bassist and vocalist Naomi Yang. They are the couple together. Interestingly, I did a lot of research on this band. There's not a whole lot about their pre-Harvard University days, and this is something to know about this group. They all met each other at the Dalton School in New York City, which is a relatively famous prep school. It's art focused, I would say, liberal artsy focused, upper middle class type school. So the 3 of them are there, and actually all 3 of them end up getting into and going to Harvard as well. So they were both high school classmates and Harvard classmates, which I thought was very interesting. Wow. Yep. You don't see that very often. But yeah, they met in 1981 when they were in high school. Damon and Dean were the same age. They were 1 year older than Naomi was. And so they kind of had a lot of artistic endeavors, all of them, and pretty much Wareham and Krakowski, that's Dean and Damon, in this case, the drummer and guitarist, sort of formed a couple bands along the way, just kind of playing, and it doesn't really work out necessarily, but they're sort of getting to know each other a little bit better musically. And then Wareham, who kind of had an eye on New York all the time. I should mention that there is a big New England theme to this band, even though they were in New York City. their formative playing days, and sort of they were identified in their peak as being sort of a Massachusetts or New England band and sound-wise influence. So just something to keep in mind there. So they're doing these different bands, and then Wareham goes to New York. However, he comes back in 1987, and they decide to form a band, and that becomes Galaxie 500. Now, the previous member who was in the band decided he didn't want to do it anymore. I believe it was something akin to like he had like a religious type of deal, like conversion type deal that kind of said like I'm going to kind of follow that muse. They're around a lot of these very seeker type personalities, and I'd kind of say all of them have a little bit of an element to that as well. And so Naomi Yang just volunteers. She goes, I'll learn how to play the bass. And she kind of mentions it in the oral history and some of the stuff I read, that she was listening to like a lot of Joy Division albums, and she loved the bass lines in Joy Division, especially how high up on the bass they played, right? Which is something I mentioned in Joy Division quite a bit too, which I found I'm like, she must have been listening to the same parts I was in Joy Division that was there. So she adopts that style a little bit, the higher up on the bass playing along the way, and basically teaches herself how to play the bass, which I thought was really interesting. She just sort of decided to do that. So the original band that Dean and Damon were in was called Speedy and the Castanets, I think was interesting. But it's so they reinvent Galaxie 500 as Speedy and the Castanets, just with a new bassist. So they name themselves after the Ford Galaxie 500, in case you guys were wondering. That's where the band name comes from. It's a very, very, very ugly car if you've ever seen it. It's long. It was called full size. It's one of those really long, almost Cadillac looking cars, but an uglier version. Yeah, so not a very pretty one. So they just begin to take some space around Harvard and practice and play at some local establishments. It's kind of amazing. Things start to happen for them relatively quickly. They're playing between Boston and New York City. Dean Wareham has connections in New York City. He kind of is considered to be a little bit more of the sort of looking at the style of things, right? A little more visual art, I'd say, a little bit. They're all both guys are strong personalities in their own way, for sure. But he sort of wants them to have a New York City presence, although the other two were certainly not against that. Like we said, they grew up in New York City, but they're playing a lot in Boston as well, and they record a demo, and it goes to a label named Shimmy Disc and a gentleman named Mark Kramer, who would become important because he produces the albums that they release, and they record a single called Tugboat in February of 1988, and it gets released, and it starts to get quite a bit of a cult following on indie rock stations, college rock stations, but also it gets well reviewed in the United Kingdom, where they start to become pretty well known and are able to tour, and they end up on Rough Trade Records at this point, which is interesting. There was a funny quote by a guy who Terry Tolton, I think his name is. He's kind of an interesting figure in the band history because he sort of becomes friends with Dean Wareham, and Damon and Naomi are not big fans of him at all, and he sort of very vocally says that he was on like Team Dean, right? And it's hard to be in a band with a couple, right? But he seems to be a very outspoken human being, probably not the easiest guy to be around all the time. But he was sort of saying that like he was working with Rough Trade, and he's like, if we'd focused on this band and Lucinda Williams instead of suing her and some other people, like we might have actually been able to keep our money, but instead they picked all the wrong horses pretty much. So they're recording, they get a following in the United Kingdom, and they actually get as high on the UK indie album chart with this album, On Fire, as number 7. But they sort of just continue to fly under the radar in the U.S., and there are some vocal holdouts in the U.S. music press, like the Tastemakers, and a lot of it is a lot of the U.S. pushback was on Wareham. They did not like his voice. They felt it was a barrier for them. So that was a little bit of what was going on. But meanwhile, they're playing John Peel's BBC Radio. John Peel loved this band and really was an outspoken person for them. They cover Jonathan Richman's "Don't Let Our Youth Go to Waste," which is pretty on the nose for a guy to cover because there's a lot of similarities between this band and some of the stuff he did and the Modern Lovers did. And yeah, this is their second album, and then they tour, and they're about to go on a tour of Japan in 1991. But as they were recording This Is Our Music, their third album, pretty much everybody agrees in that oral history that things are not going well. And just Dean Wareham just eventually says, like, I just didn't want to go on the tour, and just told him I don't really want to be a part of this band anymore. And that was it. And they have never reunited, and they're going to be in that group, it looks like, that kind of... It's very interesting because in reading it, Dean Wareham is much more kind of like, it was time. It's hard to be in a band with a couple, you know, like we just had creative differences. At least in terms of the stuff, he seems more like it was a good piece. I had stuff, I moved on to these other projects. I think for David and Naomi, it was a little bit more of a shock, kind of like they thought, oh, we have these moments and these creative differences, but we can always make it work. And they were sort of like, they felt like they were kind of betrayed right as they had more good music to make, at least as of 2010. And even when I'm reading interviews in 15 and 16, there's still elements of that. So yeah, they kind of broke up right at the peak of what their powers would be. Like we said, they never really got commercial in the United States, but they certainly weren't struggling to tour, right? And were trying to expand out, and had already had a lot of success in the UK, and were looking to expand into Asia, where they thought they had a real chance of doing it. But yep, their last performance was at April 5th in 1991 at is it Bowdoin College, the one in Maine, or Bowdoin? It's Bowdoin, right?
I think it's Bowdoin. Yeah.
Is it Bowdoin? Yeah. Okay, that was their last one.
Yeah, it's Bowdoin. Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, and I just want to make sure. And in an interesting postscript is Galaxie 500's records were on the Rough Trade label. Rough Trade went bankrupt in 1991, and Damon Krakowski, and Naomi Yang purchased the masters at the auction and reissued them in 1996. And all of the members of the band sort of described the aftermath as like they're parents of the band, and they basically have custody of this stuff, and they can do business together, right? But there definitely is still some vibes where it's like you can pretty much tell they're not going to get back together. But Dean Wareham becomes a producer. He works with the band Mercury Rev. He forms another band called Luna about a year afterwards. Krakowski and Yang continue to record. Yang's doing some music videos and some other art stuff. They have a avant-garde record label. And actually, Wareham started to play Galaxie 500 songs in 2010 with his wife at the time, and they were playing it. I thought this would be a real tension point, with the other members, but they didn't seem to be all that bothered by it, interestingly enough. So, like they said, they were able to keep, I guess, the business part of it separate than the personal. I kept looking for other aspects that were there, but it really was this story where they knew each other, they formed a band, they got a cult following pretty quickly, they toured quite a bit on the indie scene, and then in 1991 they just decided to stop, and then they stopped and moved on to other artistic pursuits. And so it was kind of a little bit of a supernova, in the indie world. They went up only to be there. They were always well regarded in the time in the indie world. Sonic Youth was a very big supporter of them. But they're well, they don't. It's funny because they're like, it was kind of interesting because we don't really sound anything like them, and vice versa. And Sonic Youth kind of said, we don't, not because of necessarily doing it, we just sort of like the ethos of the band a little bit and the vibe. So yeah, I didn't think that they were a natural fit, but they did that. But there are some people who have sort of notably mentioned they're big Galaxie 500 fans. the band Low, which fits, who we're going to cover in the 90s. Liz Phair references them on Stratford on Guy, on Exile on Guyville. Neutral Milk Hotel, big fan. Brian Jonestown Massacre. There's others, but those are ones that kind of come out and say they were very influenced by them. And there's a ton of other indie rock bands and certainly groups in the late 2000s, 2010s. Their name consistently has been brought up, but they're not just a come recently band. They've pretty much always been on that critic darling wavelength, especially in the UK, since probably the mid 90s. So that's a little bit of what's going on there. I think Josh has the first take, if I remember correct. Or is it, no, it's Matt who has the first take. I apologize. Matt, what were your thoughts on this one?
No, I think I have first take.
Oh, is it yours? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you've kind of given some tells there about how you feel about this.
Yeah, that only happens when I feel strongly about an album I dislike, and this is.
Oh, this is going to be an interesting segment then, Josh.
This is-
I can tell you already, it's going to be an interesting segment. But continue.
I really found this album very tedious. It felt like the longest 40 minutes of my life, and I listened to it multiple times to try and, get beyond my initial feelings from it. It's. I would classify this as dream pop, I think, and I think it's in the vein of not like the Cocteau Twins, but as we know, the dream pop genre is not working for me so far.
This is considered a little bit more proto shoegaze than dream pop.
Well, then shoegaze is not going to be my genre. Also, I found the lead singer's voice a real barrier to entry. Also, you mentioned that at one point. Somewhere along the way, and
some U.S. critics were vocal about that.
Yeah, it was too high pitched for me. I found the songs often I couldn't tell when one song ended and another began. They just kind of kept running into each other. Some of the stuff they incorporate some like kind of psychedelic 60s sound to some of their songs, like Snowstorm. I thought that was interesting, in a departure from kind of the rest of it. Decomposing Trees has a sax that comes in kind of abruptly, or I don't think there's a sax on the rest of the album. It's just on that song, and seems to kind of take over. That was strange for me. And then but I liked when on Another Day, they switched to the female singer, and that kind of changed it a little bit for me. I like that more. And then Isn't It a Pity came on, which is its best song, but that's a George Harrison cover. So, and then I went back and listened to the George Harrison cover or the song, and that is just better anyway, by itself, because it's George Harrison. That song did sound kind of like Oasis to me a little bit, when their rendition of it. So I thought that was interesting, but just whatever they were doing with the guitars and kind of this sad boy theme that I feel like I picked up on, or that's kind of how it sounded to me. It just did not work for me. I did not get into this album. I listened to it multiple times, as I said, and I couldn't, it felt like a droning type of album to me, even though that's not really, droning's not the right word, but it felt like the same song from the first track to the last track, and I could not kind of parse what the appeal was to people about it. We've mentioned the shoegaze thing before, I think somewhere on some album, and I think that's going to be a real uphill climb for me. But I did not like this album, so thumbs down. I'm glad there's only 3 albums of theirs.
Well, Josh, I am higher on this record than you are.
Yes.
And yeah, this is, in some ways I was kind of, I had somewhat of a similar, although more positive reaction of the album that we covered last week, which was the Blue Nile. Because both of them are very much night. These are strike me as it's another night album, right? It's a it is dream to me. It's dream pop. I saw on here slowcore. That's a term that came up again. And but it's just it was a real easy listen for me. I see what you're saying about the vocals, that there is like a piercing kind of whiny nature to it.
Yep.
Yes, it's very understandable if someone says this guy's got a terrible voice. I don't want to listen to this. I would get that, but it doesn't bother me at all. Um, I so I this A lot of these songs, they seem like they're very basic, like because it's a lot of them just start off with the guitar with a there's like zero distortion on any of the guitar, so it's a
That
very
was
kind
all
of
that was by design, Matt, by the way.
yep.
The basic structure and the recording and the strip down. Yep.
Well, and it
So
seems
you're
like
on something.
yeah, it seems like I mean, I can play some guitar, right? I know basic chords and maybe a couple of bar chords, and that's what I can do, right? So I felt like a lot of these songs, and I didn't try it, but I feel like a lot of these songs, I could sit down and within like a couple of minutes would have the chords down. Like I would just be like, okay, I got like, and it's just like two or three things, right? So it seems like a very stripped down, basic kind of chord structure that each song starts with, right? Just like with a very basic kind of chord that's, there's not really any virtuoso thing happening there. It's just like strumming a guitar. But it's done. I really do like the effect of the like whatever they're however they're creating the actual tone of the guitar. I like that effect that they're doing. It is like a very echoey kind of dream pop kind of thing, and it's melodic, right? And so I like that. And then a lot of times, yes, he throws on top of that. Now you're going to loop in the more of the psychedelic guitar. That's very, yeah, it's kind of like there's a very 60s element of this that's happening on this record. And they're throwing in some interesting things. There's times where they pick up the pace a little bit, or his voice goes a little bit higher, or yeah, they throw in the saxophone, or they have, the female, the bass player, takes a song. Obviously, they throw in a cover of "Isn't It a Pity." It's funny, Josh, you said that sounds like Oasis. That's what I was playing that earlier tonight, and Sherry's like, "This sounds like Oasis." So you're onto something. Yeah, I think you guys are in simpatico on that.
They're big in Britain, so I guess that was
Yeah. So I see what you're saying. It does it blends together, right? There's not a ton of, there's some variation. There's not a ton. I see what you're saying there. But this is another example of one of those things that they're hitting this lane, and I really like it. Like I find it very, there's a soothing nature to this to me. There's a relaxing nature to it.
I do not find this soothing. Even like compared to Blue Nile, I find that much more like evocative and calming than this. This just kind of felt like really annoying to me. Like,
what's it? Is it more the it's either the voice or it's the psychedelic guitar that I would say kind of.
Yeah, I think it's both.
It's both. Okay.
Yeah.
Because the underlying guitar part is not. That's a very easy, soothing sound to me, and and to me that's kind of like the basis and foundation of a lot of these songs. So, it's hard for me to say, oh, this song stands out. I read somewhere that somebody said, oh, Blue Thunder is the single. It's the opening track. It's the single. And that totally makes sense because it's by far the strongest song. And I didn't feel like any song in particular stood out to me as being like, that's the song. It's one piece, right? It's kind of, there's a slightly different variation throughout, but the overall sentiment and sound and vibe, and it's like a soundscape as well, right? It's just like another soundscape type record. But I like that. I like these kind of slow melodic, evening albums that are somewhat relaxing. It's very pleasant, So I enjoy. Didn't know anything about these guys. Never heard any of these songs. I was hearing a lot of different bands in here. It's another one of those records that I'm like, man, there's so many, bands even today, right? This is not just like, oh, this is like some 90s band or whatever that's coming across. John named some of them, but this is also stuff that's happening today. So it's kind of another one. It's got the foot in the past with the 60s psychedelia, but it's also got this other thing happening that pretends to kind of, some of the more indie rock and music that comes out even today. So yeah, I'm thumbs up on it. This is a very easy thumbs up for me. I liked it from the beginning. I don't know if I necessarily felt like I liked it the more that I listened to it. I felt like I liked it always the same amount, and it just kind of, once it hit me, it's there. It's great, and unique listen for me. So I'm a thumbs up on it.
Yeah, I feel like whenever I have a strong opinion, I'm always last on these things, and like I wait a long time. Like, yeah, I loved this album like a ton. Like I agree, Matt. There's something like deeply comforting about this album to me. I can't really explain it. It evoked a feeling in me of like warmness, but there was also like a desperation in it. It is definitely sad boy music, don't get me wrong, but it's like sad boy music in a lane that absolutely speaks to me. Like, I don't know how to describe it. I could put this album on at night, and this album just sort of decompressed me from the day. I just felt completely connected to it. It will almost certainly be in my top 10 albums for the 80s. That's how strongly I felt about this album. Wow. It just, everything about the voice was not a barrier to me. I actually felt it worked perfectly in contrast to the music. I actually liked if it had been a voice that did the same thing as the music, I think it wouldn't have been good, right? Because it would have just sort of been like vanilla and just blended in. I think the fact that it was jarring created this juxtaposition. It evoked a place for me. I don't even think you had to tell me this band was from New England. I knew they were either from the Pacific Northwest or from New England as soon as I heard them, because there's a winter feel to this sound.
Yeah,
that is the best way I could describe it. And because of that, I got a deep sense of place. And I'm learning the more we do this podcast, the more there are just certain albums that as I process it, I get a sense of time or place or color, just the abstract stuff, right? In the same way that sometimes when I would read poetry, it would be the same thing. I'd get an idea. And the only way I could describe is I think some people get that feeling in the way that they connect people or memories to stuff in a way that I don't do quite as much, right? Like, I don't listen to something and go, oh, that reminds me of that time. I think, Matt, that probably is a little bit more you, right? Evocative
that's
of
me.
Yep, that's you. Yeah, that I'm not saying that's negative. That's me. I get it in a more abstract idea. I'm like, this gives me a place or a time, right? There isn't necessarily anything associated with it. It just puts me in a mood that I associate with the time, and I don't know what it was, but like there was one night when I played this album. I put it on around 9 o'clock, and I just like listened on headphones in my bed, and it just was a deeply warm, satisfying feeling. The songs aren't really profound lyrically. In fact, sometimes they sound heavier than they are, but I would disagree with you, Matt, that I love the song Blue Thunder, but there were songs I liked every bit as much. I thought the cover of Isn't It a Pity was fantastic. I really did. And I love the George Harrison song too, but I thought the take they did was great. It was a great cover in the sense that it made the song different. And it took the emotions of Isn't It Pity, but ran it through a different framework. I love the song Strange. I don't like the recurring why's everybody, the touch point there. And it's funny because the song's basically about him buying stuff at a convenience store, but it just seems more profound than that in some ways. It's like that's kind of what this album is, right? It's simple, but it's also in its own way complex. And that's what that song is. It's like I'm observing people and wondering about their deepest nature while buying Twinkies, in the thing. The line, right? I love the song Snowstorm. It's nostalgic, and just like you guys said, it's got like a 60s and 70s psychedelic isn't necessarily the word, like layered feel, right? And it just flangy guitar a little bit that's there, simple riffs, but yeah, I knew nothing about this band coming in. I didn't even really know them by reputation, if I'm being very honest with you. But boy, this one really hit for me. I guess maybe, Josh, what shoegaze is a barrier for you is a virtue for me, in the sense that it
yeah, I think that's what sounded.
there's like it's like a enveloped blanket for me. It's just it really is. There's nothing about it that's it's similar, and there's bands that we know, like Beach House, right, comes to mind and stuff like that. That was when I thought of this. I'm like, I like this more than I like Beach House, but I'm like the same type of thing when I'm feeling Beach House, right? Like when I'm there's not a lot going on and I just got some time to think, but I don't want to think too hard. But I want to kind of process some stuff and get into like a headspace. Beach House and Real Estate, bands of the modern day, right, are like this. And these are sort of protos of that. And shoegaze in general, I like the version of it that's this sort of more chilled version of it. I like the version that throws in the distorted guitars to balance out. And in some ways, his voice, right, Dean's voice, is like what the abrasive guitars are in some of the other versions of this type of music. Does that make sense? Like that there's that harsh guitar that juxtaposed with the dreamy nature. That's a little bit more
Jesus
like
and Mary Chain was
Jesus
way
and Mary
more,
Chain
yeah,
comes to
it's a
mind.
harsher
Yes.
guitar sound,
Even
yeah.
Cocteau Twins, you know what I mean, do some things that sometimes have a little bit more edge to them, but they're all in the same lane. And like I get it, Josh. Don't get me wrong, because there's certain genres of sad boy music that I find a little bit eye rolly and stuff, and that we'll get into. But this one, I just process outside of my normal context. I don't process this in lyrics. I don't process this in. I process it in a feels is maybe the wrong word. I process it as like a feeling more than anything else, and it's a feeling that I enjoy. I kind of would almost describe this album as what I imagine it would be like to take heroin. Like it's kind of
this is a drug album.
It really is, and I was still able to enjoy it despite being the absolute opposite of a drug person. But like I'm like, oh, I can totally understand how
Josh,
certain
you should
would go
take
well
some
with
heroin
this.
and then listen to this, and then maybe you feel it.
That.
But doesn't it feel like a heroin album? But it's funny because they were not drug users, by the way. This band, so it was not informed by that. But it definitely seems to me like it
maybe
would be
acid. Even weed.
Acid, yep. Yeah, I don't have a lot of familiarity, but like whatever those feelings do, like I got some of it naturally from what this was. So yeah, this one gets this is my album.
Oh, album of the week.
Yeah. What were you disagreeing with me on there, John? What happened?
Her
John?
best song was Blue. Yeah.
Oh,
You cut out.
Something weird happened.
I think you're back to normal though.
But okay, yeah. You said Blue Thunder was the clear best song. I don't.
No. I didn't
love
say
the
that.
song.
I didn't say that. That's what I read, and my reaction to that was I like them all kind of the same. Nothing stood out to me as being this song's better than that one. That's somebody I read like somebody that's like, oh, it makes sense that that's a single because that's the clear best song, and I didn't agree with that. I thought they were.
I think just a lot of people feel the need to have to rank stuff, so I don't read like any commentary on stuff because I do think if you look at any comments and stuff, people just somehow feel compelled to have a strong editorial opinion on stuff. And like I'm with you, Matt, like I took this in as an entire piece, and soundscape's a great term you used before too, and that is sort of like some people would be like, I don't like this, it all sounds the same and it doesn't differentiate. And to me it's like, yes, that's what I liked about it. It kind of was,
but it just goes back to what we've talked about before. If you can do the same thing, sound samey, be all one big piece, and if you do the thing that you really enjoy, that you really like, I like that wrapping yourself in the blanket, the soundscape, like the being enveloped in the overall experience.
Well, I can't get lost in the ether in 4 minutes, like I need more time. So, and if it's something I don't like, I get it, but like if I like it, and it's not all samey, by the way. They do variations of stuff on this. So I want to say you could listen to individual songs like I did and still enjoy it. But as a piece together, it's the even best version of it.
And you're absolutely right about like Beach House and Real Estate and band like Dive, these other bands that kind of have similar vibes. And I like all that stuff. I did see Beach House live once. And it's interesting because it's not the best live show to see because nothing's happened. They just stand there, and it's not like, but I guess. Well,
I don't really want to be standing amongst people when I'm listening to I kind of want to be in my room or in a space where I'm allowed. You know what I mean? It would be because I'd want to get into the vibe, right? And it would be kind of hard to have my brain turned off for like 35 minutes.
It kind of falls in that line of like it's music that I do really enjoy, but I don't know if they were touring, I'd be like, nah, I'm good. I don't like that's not a band you need to see live, as opposed to a band that you might not want to listen to like on your own, but then you're like, you got to see this band live because it's just the performance is like this on.
I want Beach House to come to my house and just play their album. This is a live experience I want. Like this is how I feel about this
Sounds
band
like an
too.
MTV
It's like
contest.
can
Yeah.
you plug in Galaxie
Come play
500?
John's apartment.
And as if I had a stressful day, can you come in and play this album in entirety for me so that I feel fucking better afterwards? So
I'm not sure I have albums that I feel that way about. That same type of like warm enveloping feeling. I don't think I get the energy from album. I'm trying to think of other albums in the 80s.
Well, it sounds like by the very nature of what we're talking about, you don't like that anyway. Like you don't want it. You don't want a soundscape. You don't want it just an overall oral kind of like huge piece that kind of just.
well, it's just
washes
interesting
over
because you clearly connect in some things. You know what I mean? Like excitement. Depression, you know, I mean, there's feelings you've been able to process through in music you've listened to, but maybe warmth.
Maybe
Josh needs more. Josh needs more energy. Josh needs more
I
a little
think
giddy
so.
up and go. I think overall.
I think if the music's too slow, I just fall asleep, and that's not what I'm looking for. Or
Oh, if
something.
I only listened to upbeat music, I'd go insane because after a while it would drive me insane. It's
I don't
like,
think.
all right,
No,
need
I don't think
something with-
Josh.
yeah.
I don't think you only want get it, but like that's if there's too much slowness, right? That's really going to be a
Yes,
barrier. for you.
slowcore is not the genre that I need in my life.
Like Josh, if somebody put a playlist together or whatever that was more upbeat stuff, and then threw like a song from here on here, would that be okay, or would you be like skipping through that? Like I can't do that at all.
Maybe, I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
I can't even pick out a song on here that I would want on a
There's going to be
playlist.
so many bands Josh hates in the 90s and 2000s. Can you see it, Matt? Oh my gosh, there's a whole unopened. See, because I know, like, just as much as I know Matt's going to love, like, I knew going into this that Matt was going to like this album a lot and Josh was going to hate this album. I think you guys are probably starting to learn that I am a little bit more in this lane than maybe you guys thought before. But,
Are Josh and I the married couple, by the way?
yes. Josh and you are definitely the married
Josh is the
couple.
bass player and I'm the drummer.
Josh is the bass player and you're the drummer. Yes.
Yeah.
For
Well, as
sure.
soon as you tipped your hand, as soon as you said the two guys have strong personalities, I'm like, well, that's not Josh. So
She was sort of like the healer, you know what I mean? Like the listener, like kind of take it together, like kind of tried to thread both parts, get it together. The drummer was definitely more in the lane of strong personality, but he had a lot of like righteous indignation when he felt like his moral compass or like the type of communication they were having, you know what I mean? Like when I was listening to him, I'm like, this would be like what Matt and I in a band would be like. We would be having the same fights that these guys are having. Like they both like each other and they were friends, but it's like after a while, and you know, obviously, it would like be if like you and Josh formed a faction and I was the other faction, right?
Yeah.
Which probably is the case sometimes on this podcast, but yeah. So strong ideas and stuff. But yeah, it was just as I was listening, I was laughing. I was like, this band's kind of like us if we were a band. So yeah. So I'll link you guys the interview from, even if you didn't like this album, Josh, it's an interesting oral history to read because it does kind of give you, it kind of gives you everything you need in some ways about what you need to know and their process. So
Sounds good. Well, I'm glad you found a good discovery this week for a new album.
yeah, I was
sounds
writing
fun.
down my list of like albums I really like that I knew nothing about, and the 80s has definitely been the lodestar for that compared to our other decades.
Absolutely.
I could almost make a top 10 list of bands I really like that I knew nothing about that
You know,
now
maybe
I
we
would
should-
definitely evangelize for, and this might be the 10th of 10 because I had a list of 10 and this was it. Yeah.
I'm thinking we're gonna have to get together and figure out how we're gonna do the final episode because I don't know.
some
Like I
list.
feel like a top 10 is not going to be enough. Like, and I don't want to split.
Well, I felt that way about the 70s because there's a ton of stuff I loved in the 70s.
But also like
too.
splitting up the cold listens. Like I'm not differentiating them as much anymore. So I don't know.